I feel like my older sister was operating on an outrageous level of selfishness when she chose to set her baby shower on the exact date of my wedding, fully believing that everyone in the family would rally around her. However, fate had a different plan, and she ended up facing a massive dose of reality when our relatives actually chose my wedding over her celebration. This all transpired just a few days ago, and I am still so exasperated that I needed to come here to share every painful detail and let off some steam. It feels like an ongoing nightmare, especially since a wedding day is something you look forward to for a lifetime, only to have it overshadowed by a sibling's self-serving behavior. I have an older sister named Porsche, 30F, and she possesses this overwhelming, main character vibe that grates on my nerves every possible way. It has been this way her entire life and mine as well, like a never-ending spotlight following her around. I used to keep my opinions to myself, because I never cared to stir conflict or drama within my family. I always believed keeping the peace was more important. But things finally blew up on my wedding day, because she had the audacity to host a baby shower for her fourth child on the same exact day. When I discovered her plan, a mere few days before I was set to walk down the aisle, I was not just angry. I was utterly bewildered that someone could be so blatantly inconsiderate. I had sent out my wedding invites months earlier, made sure to request RSVPs well in advance, so it was impossible for me to see it as just an unfortunate coincidence. Frankly, I felt torn between ripping my own hair out, or maybe ripping out hers. To make matters worse, my gut told me my relatives might flock to her event, since she's always been the favored child in the family dynamic. I'd hoped that my special day would be exclusively mine, but with her shower overshadowing everything, I feared she'd steal my spotlight yet again. Porsche and I, for context, are 5 years apart in age. I'm 25F, and we've never had a harmonious bond. Some of the tension stems from our parents' upbringing style, but a large portion of it comes from Porsche's superior attitude. Growing up, Porsche excelled in academics, sports, and was popular with teachers and classmates alike. Our mom and dad bragged about her accomplishments all the time. Meanwhile, I floated by with average grades, and I wasn't particularly drawn to any extracurriculars that my parents deemed significant. We attended the same school, and people, from the principal down to the teachers, were often surprised that we were siblings, because we were so different, both in personality and achievements. Comparisons were non-stop, and I never measured up to their golden standard. My parents responded to my mediocrity with disappointment, and Porsche kept getting showered with praise and gifts for being the star child. From an early age, they basically spelled it out for me: become like Porsche, and you'll get the same adoration. Unsurprisingly, this destroyed my self-esteem. Even now, I struggle with feelings of inadequacy born from that environment, which ended up impacting my mental health and emotional well-being on multiple levels. By the time I reached 13, I felt convinced that having a healthy, functional relationship with my parents was impossible, so I retreated into a world of my own. I began distancing myself from them, spending hours in my room doodling, my only real outlet for creative expression. It brought me a glimmer of relief, even though nobody in my family respected or acknowledged it. I was the family's extra piece, always treated as a second thought, an outsider within my own home. They looked at me with thinly veiled disappointment, because I wasn't the gifted daughter they wanted. My mother even snatched and tore one of my sketch pads, blaming me for scribbling my time away instead of focusing on more important pursuits like Porsche supposedly did. It was heartbreaking, but it made me confront a cold reality: no matter what I did, they'd only see me as Porsche's inferior twin, never my own person. I recognized that matching up to her wasn't a goal I even wanted. So I gave up on seeking their approval and tried to live with minimal interaction. Things took a turn when Porsche left for college around the time I turned 13. Overnight, she changed, still academically successful, but far less attached to our parents. She avoided their calls, refused to visit home, and spent money recklessly. This sudden shift left my parents feeling abandoned, almost like they'd invested 18 years in one single child who suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. In that loneliness, they pivoted their attention onto me, suddenly trying to forge a connection they had ignored for so long. But I was already used to solitude, and had no interest in resurrecting a lovey-dovey family bond one had never experienced before. This made them resentful, and their anger manifested as non-stop scolding and constant attempts to make me feel guilty or inferior. It became suffocating to the point I had to drag myself through the remaining school years, just waiting for my chance to go off to college. After high school, I chose to study animation, and it felt validating to turn my scribbling into something that earned me a real career path. I found a decent job straight out of university, making a comfortable living that no one in my family had predicted for me, and I'll be candid, I take some pride in proving them wrong. Since then, my contact with my parents has remained pretty limited. They persistently tried to reconnect, possibly after realizing I wasn't a failure or maybe hoping to gain some benefits from me. I genuinely believe that after their dreams of Porsche becoming the family's big moneymaker were dashed, especially since she got pregnant right after college, rushed into a shotgun wedding, and never contributed a dime, they started viewing me as a new potential resource. The same parents who wrote me off as unremarkable suddenly wanted me back, most likely to sponge off my earnings. It isn't surprising, given how my sister's finances turned out. She'd been the one they expected to conquer the world, and now she was draining their pockets. On the other hand, my extended family, such as my Aunt Rachel, had a clearer perspective on the situation. Aunt Rachel was practically a second mom to me, calling out my parents whenever they played favorites. Eventually, many in our extended circle realized the reality of our family dynamic. They fully supported my decision to keep my parents at arm's length. Nobody urged me to reconcile with them until recently. Roughly 3 months ago, my mother experienced a serious health crisis that landed her in the hospital for an extended period. Her condition was puzzling, and it impacted her life so severely that doctors said it might be a very long time, if ever, before she recovered fully. According to Aunt Rachel, this was some sort of catalyst for my mother to reflect on her mistakes. Apparently, while in the hospital, Mom couldn't stop lamenting about how much she missed her baby, namely me. Given my minimal contact with them for a few years, I wasn't immediately informed of her hospitalization. My aunt finally decided I deserved to know a week after it happened. She explained that my mother was in fragile shape, and that she was now overwhelmed with guilt, worried she might die without a chance to prove that she regretted how she had treated me. She apparently wanted to apologize, and become the mother she never had been. This internal conflict weighed heavily on me. On one side, I suspected Mom's desire to reconnect was mostly about alleviating her own guilt rather than genuinely caring for me. On the other, I knew if I didn't give her another opportunity, I might look back and wish I had. After intense deliberation, and some urging from both Aunt Rachel and my fiancé, Edward, 29M, I decided to see her. Those initial interactions were a whirlpool of crying and apologies from her side, and I attempted to remain calm, telling her I didn't want to sift through the old trauma. My father, though trying to show a civil front, was too proud to admit his faults, so we barely exchanged words. Notably, Porsche wasn't present, and I learned later it was my mother's request that she stay away that day. Mom apparently insisted on a one-on-one reconciliation with me, and Porsche resented being excluded from the family moment, but had no choice. Fast forward to the whirlwind of wedding planning I was submerged in. I didn't really devote extra time to reconnect with my parents beyond that initial meeting, partly because wedding preparations were all-consuming and partly because I needed space. My parents saw it differently, feeling left out of everything, from minor wedding decisions to the more traditional roles that brides' parents often fulfill. Mom was visibly disappointed, but tried to suppress her feelings, which made me momentarily think maybe she truly felt remorse. Meanwhile, Dad was furious he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. He even rang me up to threaten he might not show up at all, claiming I was humiliating him in front of everyone despite our supposed return to normal. I made it crystal clear there was no normalcy restored between us, especially not between him and me. I told him if he felt too insulted, he could stay away. That shut him down, though it obviously increased the tension. Porsche and I had zero contact during this chaotic time, aside from the standard wedding invite I sent. She responded that she would attend, and that was it. I assumed that was the end of it. But then, about 2 weeks before the wedding, my cousin Lena called me in a panic. She disclosed that Porsche had just invited her to a baby shower scheduled on the same day as my wedding, at a location an hour away from my venue. Lena mentioned Porsche had been quietly phoning family members, deliberately avoiding paper invitations, so I wouldn't catch wind of it. The baby shower was billed as a major event, given it was Porsche's final pregnancy, and therefore extra special. My shock quickly morphed into raw anger. I confronted Porsche right away, asking if it was true. She spun a tale about wanting to gather the entire extended family, implying she believed people could simply attend both events, as if my wedding day was a casual affair. She even claimed I should appreciate that her unborn baby would be celebrated on my wedding date in spirit. Her brazen attitude left me speechless. I told her she was out of line and a vindictive schemer for picking my wedding day instead of scheduling it before or after, and that if her intentions were honest, she would have either told me earlier or sought my permission. The fact I discovered it through someone else, just a couple of weeks prior, confirmed it was a malicious, deliberate act on her part. She snapped back that I had no ownership over that date and that guests could choose whichever event they preferred. I was too overwhelmed to formulate a coherent argument, and the stress broke me down. Edward tried to comfort me, but he was also furious. In desperation, we decided to tackle the issue by sending a note to every invited guest. We tried to keep the tone composed, though my nerves were frayed. We wrote something like, "We've become aware of a scheduling conflict, and while we're pleased for Portia's celebration, we understand many of you might have to make a choice between attending our wedding and going to her baby shower. We ask that everyone reconfirm with my maid of honor, Zara, because we were only 2 weeks away from the ceremony and had no energy left for more unnecessary drama." I was prepared for a worst-case scenario, honestly convinced that most people would go to her baby shower, as that had been the pattern my entire life. I even told Edward that if almost nobody showed up, we'd just head to City Hall and quietly get married. That's how jaded I had become, with zero expectation of being anyone's priority. The next few days were agonizing. I avoided phone calls to preserve my sanity, but eventually, I asked Zara how many had confirmed. She gave me a vague reassurance to not stress and promised she was taking care of everything. That was not exactly calming, but I tried to trust her. When my wedding day finally arrived, I braced for heartbreak, but to my absolute amazement, nearly every relative and friend I had invited actually showed up. The ones who were missing included Porsche, obviously, my father, as I had predicted, and a paternal aunt with her family. Everyone else made it a point to be there, including my mother, which genuinely shocked me, because she rarely does anything without my father. The ceremony itself was magical, and went off smoothly, untainted by my dad's presence. While some brides might be upset that their father skipped the ceremony, I felt strangely relieved he wasn't there sulking and judging. I was savoring the day, joy welling inside of me. But of course, Porsche couldn't stand being overshadowed, especially not after a lifetime of lapping up everyone's attention. Mere minutes after the vows, as people were moving towards the lunch spread, I noticed Porsche and my father at the entrance. Zara rushed over to block them, and I saw a heated exchange as they tried to push past her. They eventually shoved their way in, which left poor Zara powerless to stop them physically. Next thing I knew, Porsche started wailing, and this wasn't just a small cry. It was like a theatrical meltdown, tears streaming and voice echoing across the venue, akin to an inconsolable toddler. She was lamenting how everyone had chosen my wedding over her supposedly final baby shower, and saying I should have been considerate enough to postpone my wedding once I learned about her plans. I was so mortified I could barely speak, especially because Edward's family, my friends, and colleagues were witnessing her tantrum. Then my Aunt Rachel intervened, reminding Porsche that I had locked in my date months ago, so if Porsche had any decency, she would have rescheduled her baby shower. Porsche glared at Dad for backup, but he remained suspiciously silent. That's when Porsche crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She declared that marriages often end in divorce, so there was a good chance I could have another wedding in the future, whereas this was guaranteed to be her last baby. I was enraged enough to slap her, although I somehow held back. The mere suggestion that my marriage might fail on my wedding day was beyond unforgivable. I ordered her to leave, retorting that she already had 3 children and who knew if she'd pop out more, given that reproducing was basically the only big life move she'd made post-college, especially after she blew through our father's finances. She shrieked something incoherent, but I cut her short and informed her she was a terrible person who cared solely for herself. I added that I pitied her kids for having a mom so absorbed by her own vanity. That comment effectively silenced her, though it triggered fresh hysterical crying. Zara and another friend took on the awkward chore of physically guiding her out of the venue. By the time it was over, I was trembling and in tears, feeling like the day had been thoroughly spoiled. The atmosphere had become so tense that many guests shortened their lunch and left quietly. It hurt me deeply that throughout this entire ordeal, my mother never once stood up for me, or even warned me about Portia's plans. All her apologies and promises of a fresh start felt hollow, because she'd failed at the first real opportunity to protect me. When everyone else had gone, I collapsed into Edward's arms, sobbing and apologizing for letting the day become such a train wreck. He simply held me close and reassured me it wasn't my fault at all. He insisted anyone else in my shoes would have reached a boiling point after a lifetime of being overshadowed. 5 days have passed since the wedding, and I am still grappling with the emotional aftermath. My inbox is flooded with messages from extended relatives, friends, everyone who witnessed that fiasco, wanting to offer sympathy or get the full story. I haven't responded yet, because I feel numb and exhausted. Tomorrow we leave for our honeymoon, and I'm praying it will give me the mental space to move beyond this. My vicious sister ruined my wedding day, but I refuse to allow her to ruin my honeymoon too. She doesn't deserve another inch of my emotional bandwidth. Update 1. I took a break from Reddit during my honeymoon, never anticipating my story would gather so many comments and attention. I'm genuinely touched by the concern and the solidarity people showed, so here's a quick update. While away, Edward and I maintained minimal contact with my side of the family. My mother desperately attempted to reach me multiple times. When I finally gave in and answered, she insisted on meeting up to apologize in person for her inaction at my wedding, adding that she was ashamed of herself for letting me down. I confronted her, saying this wasn't just about the wedding day fiasco, but also about her keeping Portia's baby shower plot hidden from me. She insisted she was trying to spare me from getting upset, and that she had assumed people would choose the wedding anyway. I told her that her assumptions didn't justify the betrayal, pointing out she had once again chosen not to protect me, choosing Portia's feelings first. She continued to apologize, but I explained I needed space. She tried leveraging her illness, reminding me that her health had improved just enough to want to reconnect, and she didn't want to lose me again. I reminded her that actions speak louder than words, and her repeated loyalty to Portia over me demonstrated she was still unreliable. She wept, and I hated being harsh, but years of suppressed hurt came spilling out of me. I stated I'd reach out to her in my own time, and asked her not to rush me. It felt like she hoped a little guilt trip might work, but that approach had stopped working on me years ago. She then passed the phone to my dad, and the instant I heard his voice, I hung up. He followed up with a long text I didn't even open. I've blocked him since. In better news, many family members messaged me to convey how appalled they were by Portia's attempt to overshadow my wedding. At least I know I have allies in the extended family. For now, though, I'm trying to preserve my calm and refocus on my life. Update 2. It seems the drama refuses to die down. Portia's husband, whom I'll call Jake, appeared at my doorstep yesterday, looking tired and stressed. I wasn't inclined to talk, but his regret was so palpable I invited him in for a conversation. The first words out of his mouth were an apology, explaining that he had no clue Portia planned to pull off her baby shower stunt on my wedding date. He said he had originally arranged her baby shower for the week after my wedding, but Portia insisted on moving it. She also told him I hadn't invited them to the wedding, which he believed made some sense, given our strained relationship. He saw no reason to clarify with me, figuring I wouldn't extend an invitation after everything that had happened in the past. Once he learned what actually went down, thanks to my mother, he felt mortified and wanted to make amends. I told him he had nothing to apologize for, because he wasn't the one who crashed my wedding, and if his wife is old enough to have 4 kids, she's definitely old enough to own her reprehensible behavior. He offered to help smooth things over, but I told him the only meaningful apology would need to come from Portia herself, and even then, I doubted I'd ever truly forgive her. Still, I appreciated his sincerity, and let him know I had no personal grudge against him. Yet her actions have already inflicted damage that can't be reversed with a simple "I'm sorry." Update 3. Word has it that Portia and Jake are headed for divorce. Apparently, this baby shower episode was the straw that broke the camel's back in a marriage that was already shaky. Portia is now blaming me for her marital breakdown, but the rest of the family has grown tired of her manipulative sob stories. She's been forced to move in with mom and dad temporarily, and she even had the nerve to contact me, demanding that I babysit her children without pay as a form of repentance for supposedly messing up her life. I instantly blocked her across all platforms, refusing to indulge her ridiculous demands. From what I gather, Jake is seeking full custody, citing an unstable environment at Portia's place. So it sounds like this might evolve into a messy legal fight. I have no intention of getting entangled in that storm. I've chosen to distance myself completely from the chaos, including my parents, because they bring more harm than good into my life. I think back to the peaceful existence I led before they manipulated their way in again. The only relatives I maintain ties with are those who stood unwaveringly by me during the wedding debacle, my Aunt Rachel, and a few cousins who actively supported me. I am incredibly grateful for their solidarity. Moving forward, I plan to guard my boundaries fiercely so I can safeguard the tranquil life Edward, our sweet dog Emma, and I have built. I see no reason to sacrifice my peace for people who have repeatedly proven they don't value my emotional well-being.